Welcome to yet another episode of the Medical Affairs Dialogues. This is a very special event for me and session for me because in this platform, for the first time, we have invited a medical affairs leader, a woman medical affairs leader, and the topic that we have chosen is a very special and a near and dear um, topic in my heart. So, without any further delay, I want to start this session. Diversity in clinical trials is not just a tick mark, but it is a very fundamental aspect of driving better healthcare outcomes. What is the role of a policymaker? What is the role of a patient advisor or an advocate? What is the role of a industry leader? We will talk about this and more in this episode. The guest that we have invited today is amazing, and you will see why I say that. And it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome our guest. The guest for this episode is Gissoo DeCotiis. Thank you, Gissoo, for being a part of this session. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Prati. It's very nice to be here.
Yeah. Um, I want to take this opportunity to introduce you first to my audience. Gissoo is energetic, results-driven leader with expertise in advocacy, marketing, business development, and cross-functional project management. She's passionate about aligning business and patient care goals through education and empowerment. She has proven track record in managing large, complex projects across multifunctional and multicultural teams. Thank you, Gissoo, again for being here and being a part of this episode. The topic for today is advancing equity in healthcare, diversity in clinical trials, and the power of patient advocacy. Before we go any further, Gissoo, I want to ask you and lay it out for my audience. How did you create and curate such a unique career? What challenges did you face while going through this journey?
Sure. My role is the head of global advocacy at Daiichi Sankyo. I've been with the company for the past 6 years, and my career journey had started in finance industry. And my last position was with the American Express, where I led the relationship management for several of our large B2B business to business accounts. My brother passed away from cancer. So I decided to make a change and make sure that no one was treated the same way as my family. So I wanted them to have information, time with their healthcare providers, and also understanding better the treatments that were offered. I think in my current role, the biggest contribution that I make for patients is to include them in all of our process steps and help them have a voice in our entire life cycle, and making sure that they're included from preclinical all the way to post marketing and every step in between where the patient's voice is needed. I work very closely with patient advocacy community to make sure that patients are represented properly in our organization and also broader.
Thank you, Gissoo. Thank you for elaborating on your career and what a journey. Gissoo, I want you to lay the foundation for my audience and my listeners. What are clinical trials? Why are they so important for improving healthcare outcomes? Because this will set the stage for discussing why we are discussing this topic today.
Sure. Diversity in clinical trials is really crucial because it ensures that the research findings that we have accurately reflects the broader population, allowing for the development of treatments that are safe and effective for people of different demographics, including race, ethnicity, age, gender, and also socioeconomic status, rather than just limiting the studies to a small group, which can lead to potentially harmful consequences if not addressed properly. Essentially, a lack of diversity could result in treatments that are not optimal for certain populations because of their unique biological responses to medicines. Most new medicines are developed following a series of clinical trials. The most advanced are the phase 3 studies that are designed to assess both safety and efficacy or whether a drug works in large populations. Ideally, one that includes a diverse group of people. Unfortunately, most trials lack a range of diverse trial participants.
Yeah. Um, and you've laid it out so beautifully that diversity in the clinical trial is so critical and why. So then that leads me to the next question, which is what are the biggest challenges that you are encountering in while you are ensuring diverse representation in clinical trials today?
Yeah, it's not just us really, having this, ensuring that this diversity is included, but according to the U.S. Census, the U.S. population today includes 30 to 40% minorities, about 14% African American, 19% Latino or Hispanic, 6% Asian, and with the much smaller percentages of indigenous Americans, less than 2%. A recent analysis of 32,000 people who participated in new drug development trials in the US in 2020 showed that only 8% were Black, 6% Asian, 11% Hispanic, and only 30% were over 65 years old, which shows an underrepresentation of important demographic groups in our clinical trials. The study authors also concluded that these statistics are now worse since 2019.
Mm.
In order to match the population, we would need at least 30 to 40% minorities in all of our trials.
So, Gisu, what do you want to touch upon the male and the female ratio because you spoke about the the race that gets incorporated or involved in clinical trials, and that's why we see some amount of diversity. And we just now heard from you what are the challenges, but do you have any kind of statistics or kind of can you throw some light on the gender inclusion and why is it so important, why we think about gender inclusion as well?
Yeah, so I don't have a lot of data on the number of women and men that are included. But if you think about 50% of each, most of the trials have a lot more women in them. More men in them than
Men.
women. And so the medicines may be really good for men because of their weight and their stature, but may not be appropriate for women, even though they're adjusted for weight and size. But it's not really studied in that population. So I would really hope that that changes and more women are included in trials. What, like for breast cancer trials, if you think about them, there's not as many men included because only 1% of men have breast cancer.
Mhm.
But the studies are very much women, but then there's not enough of a diversity in the various populations of women. So it's
And
important to look at it from just gender, but then everything else as well.
yes, yes, very well said. And also, I would like to highlight here to add on to what you said. If the females are not incorporated, their hormonal issues, their how they react to a particular drug, or what are the adverse events, these are not getting recorded. These are not getting incorporated. So it's a missed opportunity, right?
Agreed. It's a missed opportunity, but it's something that the entire clinical trial machine needs to worry about.
Yeah, yeah. So my next question is, how does patient advocacy contribute to advancing diversity in clinical trials? And I know this is a very, very big pain point and you're passionate about it. I want you to throw some light on it.
Sure. So patient advocacy groups are a compilation of many patients, right? They are the ones who advocate for the patients. They help patients participate in clinical trials by raising awareness, advocating for patients, and also providing support to them. Patient advocacy groups serve a variety of functions, like raising the awareness about diseases and unmet needs of patients. They advocate for patients and lobby for healthcare reforms, and they provide community of support for patients and caregivers. While these roles greatly impact both patients and the pharmaceutical industry, perhaps their most important role is that of educating their constituents, particularly when it comes to clinical trials.
Yeah, so true and so well said. So, are there any specific policies or regulations that need to change to foster a greater diversity in these trials?
As a practical matter, governmental organizations like the FDA
Mhm.
and the National Institutes of Health require diversity in their activities. FDA legislation insists on recruiting a diverse population for testing a drug. In an updated 2020 advisory, the FDA recommended different approaches that sponsor of clinical trials for new drugs can take to increase enrollment of underrepresented populations in their clinical trials. For pharma companies looking for an FDA approval, getting the drug approved may be difficult if the clinical studies are not representative of all of the ethnic groups. And it's not a good enough thing to say that you tried. Now, the National Institutes of Health recommends that studies should define goals for the recruitment of underrepresented participants in clinical trials. In addition, since 1993, National Institute of Health Revitalization Act, NIH, has required researchers looking for grants to include women and minorities in their NIH funded studies. But with the current environment in Washington, D.C., I'm not sure where these previous recommendations will land now.
Hmm. Yeah, I see the bright side of it, but I see the complicated piece too here. It's not as easy as we think, sitting behind the table, and I'm like, I want these changes, I want these incorporations, but it's much more um, of a piece to move and see everything with perspective. I agree. Gisu, my audience and listeners here in this podcast are diverse, like medical affairs. There are marketers who listen to this podcast. There are policymakers, medical affairs professionals, project managers, clinicians, regulatory affairs. So, for those diverse stakeholders, I want you to explain how they can play a role in promoting equity in healthcare, because I truly believe that each of us have a role to play. It's not just that you will push the needle or you will have the paradigm shifted. All of us as a team has to do our part, do our role, so that you can move that needle and be that change, be that face for the change. So if all of us want that change, we have to do our role. So explain to us how we can really play our role in promoting equity in healthcare.
I agree with you fully. It's, I only work in oncology, and I always say it's a team sport because to make a successful case for inclusion in a clinical trial, minority participants may want to know whether the drug has been studied in their specific ethnic group. So,
Mhm.
healthcare professionals may hold some unconscious biases that affect how they interact with patients. This can result in differential treatment, lower quality of care, and poorer health outcomes for minority patients. Also, some providers may be unaware or insensitive to the cultural norms and values of minority groups. We can collectively educate around the appropriate activities with the patient community around clinical trials or the healthcare system and help reduce the barriers to access for patients, no matter what their background or educational level.
Yeah, so beautifully put. Gisu, before I jump on to my last question for this episode, I want you to talk from your heart what patient voice means for you, and what do you want to see that we do to incorporate more patient voice in clinical trials in this setting.
Yeah, actually, patient voice can be included not just in clinical trials, but throughout the development process at any place from preclinical all the way to post marketing, right? Even materials that are created by commercial teams need to have the patients review them for understanding. Publications that we help support need to also be in lay version for patients so they can read and understand it by themselves. So we all have a role in how we make sure that the patient's voice is heard throughout the process, depending on what role we play within the organization or any place where we work. If patients are important to your processes, including patients and asking them about what is their need, unmet need, is really important as well.
So correct and so beautifully put. And this can only come from experience, right? I can hear it in your voice. So I want to know, when you started off and started working with the patients, becoming this ardent patient advocate, to now, have you seen a change in how we look at patient centricity, how we are incorporating patient voice? What is your take on this?
So I've been in this space for about 20 years, and I've seen great changes made for patients where when I first started, there weren't enough patients in the metastatic space that lived long enough to be able to advocate for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
With the medicines that have come along, patients are living longer lives, and their survivorship looks better because more people are cognizant of what it means to be a patient. So their lived experience with, in my case, cancer is really important to be included in everything that we do, because without that, you really cannot be patient centric. You can't create things without asking those folks about what is important and relevant to them. So within the past 20 years, I've seen great strides made in including the patient's voice in all of our process steps, but there's still a lot more we can do, especially not all companies are doing the same thing. So maybe standardizing some of the processes and looking at every process step for each company, because we all do clinical development differently, and figuring out which steps can actually benefit from inclusion of patients and their voices in that process.
This came from so much, like from the heart, and you have touched upon such great points. To my viewers and listeners and the key stakeholders working in big companies, in nimble startups, I want to request you, wherever you can, like Gisu said, include patient voice. Patient centricity is the key and should be the center stage. With that, I will ask you my last question, Gisu. What gives you hope for the future of diversity in clinical trials? And what steps should be taken next to drive meaningful change together?
Yeah, so lately there's been a lot in the news about DEI and diversity as a whole. But if we want to have medicines that work for everyone, then we need to include everyone in the studies that we do. It gives me hope that others feel the same way and are making sure that the regulatory bodies are cognizant of this fact also. So it's important because we're all patients in waiting. that our voices are heard and we are included in trials that matter to us.
Thank you, Gissoo. Thank you for such an enlightening and insightful session. I'm very sure my audience and listeners will really, really benefit from this. It's a wrap from today's conversation, and this episode comes to an end. If I have to really summarize after discussing with you that diversity in clinical trials and the power of patient centricity or patient advocacy, I will say that representation matters. And there are many, many challenges, but there's hope too. Do you want to
Agreed.
add? Yeah, do
No,
you want to add
agreed, Rati.
anything?
No, I agree with you completely. There is hope, there's always hope, and we as a community have to push forward.
So true. So true. So, to my listeners and audience, we are ending this session. And if you think that you've enjoyed this session and you have learned something new, please watch this episode. Please subscribe to this channel and share this episode with your network. Until next time, stay tuned, stay informed, and stay engaged.